mess up here. You guys will go home and still think you had a good church experience today, so praise God. So anyways, we're in a series, and unfortunately I don't have control over my schedule entirely, and so you guys are only getting like half of it, so we come in, it's kind of bits and pieces, but if you want to see the entire series and everything we've covered, you can go to Mayo Seventh-day Adventist YouTube page, and there the sermons are cataloged, and you can go through them. But so far, what we've learned is that there's 4 G's of resolving conflict, and we're trying to do so biblically. And the idea of resolving conflict is to do so in a manner that brings glory to God and draws us closer to one another through the conflict. Amen? Amen? Amen. All right, you're awake. Good deal. All right, so we've looked at the responses, and we've seen that there's peacemaking responses, which are these ones in the center of this half circle. And then you have escape responses over here. These are peace-faking responses. This doesn't mean that you want to make peace. This just means that you want to pretend or put on the facade that you have. So we do these. And then there's peace-breaking responses, and these are you're done with trying to make peace. You're going to start war instead. All right? So those are responses over here, but we want to be in these responses over here, and we've talked about some of them as we've went along. And so we want to be in these responses in the curve. We've talked about the 4 G's of resolving conflict. Well, not all of them. We've only talked about glorifying God. And last week was the first week where we talked about get the log out of your own eye. But the other 2 are gently restore and go and be reconciled. And then at Mayo last week I was there, and at Grayling we learned that there, when it comes to getting the log out of your own eye, that there are 2 elements that must be checked. There's attitude issues and there's behavior issues. We focused on attitude issues last week. Again, if you want to see those, you'll have to go and look at the catalog sermons for Mayo. But the attitude issues are, we must define the issues, overlook minor offenses, check our attitude and change it if necessary, count the cost, and then we discussed what about our rights in a conflict. So, then we looked at 5 basic principles to help us resolve our own attitude issues. So when we see ourselves in attitude issues, we looked at 5 basic principles to help resolve those, and those are rejoice in the Lord always, let your gentleness be evident to all, replace anxiety with prayer, see things as they really are, and practice what you've learned. And I just want to pause on that last one. It doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. If you're not practicing it, it does not help you. It is not wisdom, right? I can assure you that if you were to look at my computer, I could give you about 300 gigabytes of information on diet programs. But it has not helped me reduce my belt size, all right? We got to practice our knowledge, amen? All right. So these are the basic principles for adjusting our attitude, but this week we'll discuss typical behavioral issues in conflict, on how they affect us on getting the log out of our own eye. So the 4 G's of resolving conflict: glorify God, get the log out of your own eye, gently restore, and go and be reconciled. You'll see I put a little cartoon in here. I was hoping somebody would laugh. I didn't hear it at either church, so it must not be that funny. But yes, thank you. Thank you. So it's this guy saying, dude, I think I got something in my eye. And this guy is saying, don't worry, I'll help you get it out. And last week when we looked at the Greek of speck, it's actually an immeasurable amount, an insignificant amount is what Jesus is referring to, the speck that was in your brother's eye when you have a log or a plank in yours. So this just signifies what that looks like. So Sand, in his book on Peacemaker, shares an experience, a story that helps us draw out this lesson that I'm sure that every single one of us here can relate to. If you have kids, I'm sure you can relate to the story. If you don't have kids, if you have nieces or nephews, I'm sure you can relate to the story. If you've been in a car around kids, you can relate to this story. And if not, you're going to have to change the story to relate it to your personal persona or whatever. So Sand shares the story about a fight that he got into with his kids. He says, all I wanted was a little peace and quiet when I came home from a long day at the office. Not getting it, my children, Megan and Jeff, had been trying to control each other all week, and their constant friction had exhausted their mother's patience. Instead of resolving their quarrels with her usual calm, Corlett found herself resorting to sharp words and threats of, wait until your father gets home. So instead of walking through the door and finding smiling children and a serene, affectionate life, I found nothing but sullen faces, irritable voices, and the general sense that I had walked into a war zone. Anybody relate to that? Even Corlett, as evening came around, Corlett and I worked to break the cycle of conflict, but it would start again in a day or two. By Sunday morning, I was feeling frustrated and resentful toward my children. Corlett had decided to go to church early that morning to meet with some other women, and I followed 30 minutes later with the kids. As we approached the car, a new contest began. I know you've heard this before. It's my turn to sit in the front seat. No, you got to yesterday. Well, you shouldn't sit there anyways. You're too small. The airbags could kill you. I don't care. I'm not sitting in the back seat. Then a new voice entered the exchange. Be quiet, I shouted, then pointed to each child in turn. You get in the back seat right now, and you get in the front seat, and I don't want to hear another word out of either of you. Climbing into the car myself, I gave vent to the anger that had been building in me all week. I even adjusted the rearview mirror so I could glare at Megan as I lectured her in the back seat. Among other things, I told them I was very angry at the way they had behaved all week and that I was now going to make things miserable for them. When I finally paused to take a breath, Jeffrey saw his opening and said, Daddy, do you think you should pray to Jesus and ask him if it's rightful anger? Clearly, we've all been in a situation very similar to something like this. And oftentimes when we vent our anger, other people bear the brunt of that. This story illustrates what James was talking about in James 4, 1 through 3. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. James is trying to tell us that the reason why we get into fights, the reason why we get into conflicts, the reason why we get into quarrels with others is because we are exercising our passions. We have desires that we don't get, so we murder. We covet and we can't obtain, so we start a fight. James is breaking down in a pragmatic way what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 15, verse 19. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, and slander. These passages describe the underlying matter in conflict, unmet desires in our heart. If we have unmet desires in our heart, that is the root of conflict. Sand states it this way in Peacemakers, page 102. When we want something and don't feel like we will be satisfied unless we get it, that desire starts to take control of us. If others fail to meet our desires, we sometimes condemn them in our hearts and fight harder to get our own way. If unmet desires in our hearts go unchecked, they become an idol for us. Let's look at the progression of how this happens one step at a time. This is the progression of an idol. The first step is I desire. The second step is I demand. The third step is I judge. The fourth step is I punish. We're going to go through these one at a time. But these are the steps in progression to make an idol out of someone, something, or a conflict. Let's break these down. We'll start with I desire. Conflict always begins with some kind of desire. All right? If we didn't have a desire, we wouldn't be interested in it, and therefore it wouldn't matter to us. We just wouldn't ever get into a conflict because it wouldn't be an issue on our radar. Now, some desires are just inherently wrong, all right? The desire for vengeance, it's wrong. The desire for greed, wrong. The desire for lust, it's wrong. God says these are wrong, and if you are entered into a conflict with somebody who is desiring those items, those things, it's really out of your control, and God needs to help them, but you are not the problem. The other person is the problem. All right? However, some desires are not wrong, like desiring peace and quiet, respectful children, a loving spouse, or even material things like a new computer, a successful career, or even growing a church. These are good desires, and it's okay to desire these things. However, if someone is standing in the way of your good desire, we might have to address that. In those cases, it's appropriate to talk to them about it. And as you talk it over with the other person, you may both find ways that you can grow and benefit each other through this conflict. Maybe even sometimes you'll need to enlist the help of a mediator, such as an elder, a pastor, or a trusted advisor, to help you find a solution. But that is all right if you can come to a peaceful solution. But what do we do when we are constantly met with conflict? What do we do? That helps. What do we do if the other person constantly fails to satisfy your desire? Now, if you can simply live life without that relationship, the answer is simple. I can just move on, right? If I'm walking down the road in a busy street and somebody bumps my shoulder and it offends me and a conflict may start to arise, it's easy for me to avoid that conflict because that relationship is meaningless to me, and I can simply walk away and keep walking, and my day or my attitude won't be changed because the relationship was meaningless. But what do we do when that person who is constantly failing you, constantly failing to meet your desires, is someone like a spouse or a child or a coworker or a church member? Well, then you'll need to choose two courses of action. On the one hand, you can trust God and seek your fulfillment in him. Psalm 73:25, whom have I in heaven but you, and there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. You can ask him, you can ask God to help you continue to grow no matter what the person says or does. This can be an area of growth for you. James 1:2-4 says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. You can simply, when conflict arises in you or towards you, when somebody, your desires are not being met by somebody else, you can continue to love the person, blocking your desire, and pray for him or her to be sanctified by God's grace and love, and then wait for the Lord to open the door to resolve the issue at a later time. That is a very mature response. It's a very Christian response, and it's one that is very effective. However, it's not always healthy, and it's not always the response that God would want you to use. Because if you really have a legitimate issue, just overlooking that problem is not God's answer to that problem, and it should never be done. If you choose this course, God promises to bless you and use this difficult situation to conform you to the likeness of Christ, as Paul teaches us in Romans 8:28 and 29. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. It's very simple. We get into a bad conflict or conflict arises. Our desires are not being met. We simply overlook the issue. God promises that he will bless it. All things are going to work together for good. And we'll probably have an amazing testimony, and we'll probably have a ministry in future life to help others through whatever they're struggling with. That is one thing that can happen. However, the problem is that we usually pursue a different course. And that's why we're here today. Now, I want to pause before I go any further because I just said that. I want you to know that I am not preaching to the choir. And everything that we're going to discover from this point on, we're all susceptible of. Every one of us are prone to everything we're going to talk about. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's called sin. It's part of our nature. I shouldn't say there's nothing wrong with that. There is something wrong with it. God is going to restore us. And in heaven, it won't exist anymore. But he says down here, it's something you're going to struggle with. And as you surrender and submit to me, as you come to me, I'm going to help you get through it. And I'm okay with that. Maybe I'll say it that way. All right? So I'm not just preaching to you. I'm telling you this is what we all do. We usually pursue a different course, and that course leads to dwelling on our disappointment and allowing our desire and disappointment to control our lives. At the very least, this course leads to self-pity and bitterness towards those who block our desires. And at worst, this course leads to destroyed relationships and draws us away from God. You know, it's interesting. This is the 20-year date of 9/11. On 9/11, it's a very special date, a significant date. I do remember exactly where I was. I could tell you the people that were with me. I could tell you what I was doing. I could tell you what they were wearing. I could tell you the conversations that we had after this was all going on. I met people months later after that 9/11 attack that literally quit their jobs because they couldn't handle work anymore. Life suddenly became insignificant to them. This was a major event in American history. And I appreciate fully every single responder that went into those buildings, that did what they could do to help others. I appreciate fully the flight attendants and the pilots and those passengers that were on those planes dealing with those terrorists. I appreciate fully the American culture that brought about the spirit that if somebody's in need, we are going to help. I appreciate being an American. Now, this might be a little biased, but America is still the best country in the world. All right? And because I'm American, I can say that. So there's other great countries, but we're better. Sorry. All right. So if YouTube is reaching you in Germany or England or somewhere else, I am sorry, but that is my opinion. You have the right to change my mind. Okay. So America is the best country. But America sometimes, our culture that we live in, makes it difficult to pick up on some of the biblical concepts in the Bible because the Bible is a familial society. Jesus says that when you become a Christian, you are part of his family. And in a family, we have to consider others' rights more than our own rights. In America, we, in some cases, worship independence, which again is not a bad thing. That's why you can live up north and not be dependent on electric or gas or whatever, you can have wood stove or whatever. It's a good thing. It leads to ingenuity. It leads to invention. It's a great thing. Independence can be a great thing. It can be a bad thing. It can help us overlook some lessons that we find in the Bible. And so the reason why I'm saying all of this is because you cannot have a good relationship this way if you're at odds or have a bad relationship with somebody this way. That's not acceptable to God. It's not. If you're in conflict with another person, your relationship with God gets fractured. It doesn't matter whether that person is Christian or not. It doesn't matter whether it's your fault or not. If you haven't done all you can do to resolve that conflict or that issue with that person, your relationship with God has been fractured. And the only way to get this relationship with God unfractured is to take care of this fractured relationship with this person on this level. Do you understand what I'm saying? All right? So when I say at worst this course leads to destroyed relationships and draws us away from God, that's exactly what I'm talking about. All right? So we don't want to have conflict with other people, or at least we don't want to have unresolved conflict with other people. We want to resolve it if at all possible. So let's examine how the downward spiral works. So first we desire, we have desires in our heart, and then if they become unmet, the next progression of an idol is I demand. Now unmet desires have a potential of working themselves deeper into our hearts, especially when we see a desire as something we need or deserve, and therefore must have in order to be happy or fulfilled. If this happens, we start to justify or legitimize our desire. So let's look at a couple examples of this. Now, I apologize. This is a terrible slide. I didn't know how to make it better, but it is what it is. So these are some statements that we make when our unmet desires turn into demands. I work hard all week. Don't I deserve a little? These are statements or questions that arise when we start justifying or legitimizing our unmet desires. I work hard all week. Don't I deserve a little peace and quiet when I come home? God calls for me to provide for our family. I deserve to have more appreciation and support for the long hours I put in. I just want to have the kind of physical intimacy God intended for marriage. He's my pastor, so he should visit me faithfully in the hospital. Now, in and of these selves, there's some good elements here, right? Sand brings forth a valid point in regard to this. There's an element of validity in each of these statements. The trouble is that if these seemingly legitimate desires are not met, we can find ourselves in a vicious cycle. The more we want something, the more we think we need and deserve it. And the more we think we are entitled to something, the more convinced we are that we cannot be happy and secure without it. In other words, this unmet desire becomes something that I need, and I can't be happy or secure without it. And if I get to that place, I have just made my unmet desire an idol. The problem is when we When we deem something as being essential to our well-being and fulfillment, it moves from being a desire to a demand. And the statement will change and it will evolve. And so this is how this will work. Instead of saying the statement, I wish I could have this, it evolves into, I must have this. Do you understand how the demand has come in now? This is where the problem sets in. Where the initial desire may have been perfectly fine, when we get to this step, the desire has grown so strong that it starts to consume our thoughts and control our behavior. When this happens, our initial desire, no matter how right it was, becomes an idol. Now, most of us think that an idol is just a created image we worship, but the Bible defines idolatry a little different. Ephesians 5:5, for you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is, an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. So the way that the Bible will define an idol is this. An idol is anything apart from God that we depend on to be happy, fulfilled, or secure. All right, now I'm going to repeat that one more time because I know that we're going through a study here and it's kind of dry, I get it. But I'm going to repeat that one more time so you can let this definition sink in. An idol is anything apart from God that we depend on to be happy, fulfilled, or secure. Martin Luther defines an idol as this. To whatever we look for and good thing and for refuge in every need, that is what is meant by God. To have a God is nothing else than to trust and believe in him from the heart. To whatever you give your heart and entrust your being, that, I say, is really your God. So if I'm looking for something apart from God that brings me happiness, that I depend on for my happiness, my fulfillment, or my security, I have now made that desire, in this case, that unmet desire, an idol. Now, there's nothing wrong with a man wanting physical intimacy from his wife in marriage. And there's nothing wrong with the wife wanting that from his man or from her husband in marriage. There is nothing wrong with wanting peace and quiet when you come home from work. There's nothing wrong with desiring to be appreciated and validated for your hard work. And there's nothing wrong with craving to be visited by your pastor when in the hospital. But when those desires becomes demands, there's a problem, and now you have crossed the line. You can't demand somebody to meet your needs. That's not your prerogative. If desires turn into demands that must be met in order for us to be satisfied and fulfilled, they can lead to bitterness, resentment, or self-pity that can destroy a family, business, or a church. Let's look at this. How do we determine between a desire then and a sinful demand? Now, there are some questions that you can ask yourself. These are called X-ray questions. These are questions that you can ask yourself to determine if your desire, your unmet desire, or your desire, unmet desire and conflict, has turned into a sinful demand. These are the questions that you can ask. And I didn't put this on a separate slide because I was afraid that if I had too many slides in here that I was going to talk too long and you guys would be here all day and be mad at me. So you're just going to have to rewatch this over and over again if you want to catch these questions. All right, so question number 1. What am I preoccupied with? What is the first thing on my mind in the morning and the last thing on my mind before bed? In other words, what am I thinking about when I wake up in the morning and what am I thinking about before I go to bed? All right, if I have something that's preoccupying my time, my mind, my thoughts all the time, I need to pray and make sure that's not an idol. How would I answer the question, if only blank, then I would be happy, fulfilled, or secure? Well, if only he would do this, I would be happy. Well, if only she would say this, I would be happy. If only they acted like this, I would be secure. If only I had this, I'd be fulfilled. You understand? I've now made an idol. What do I want to preserve or avoid at all costs? Where do I put my trust? What do I fear? When a certain desire is not met, do I feel frustration, anxiety, resentment, bitterness, anger, or depression? Is there something I desire so much that I'm willing to disappoint or hurt others to have it? If you answer yes to one or more of those preceding questions, then it is time to ask God if you have created an idol. The next step in the progression after I desire and I demand is I judge. Idolatrous demands usually lead us to judge others. David Paulison writes judgment this way. We judge others, criticize, nitpick, nag, attack, condemn, because we literally play God. This is heinous. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and to destroy. Who are you to judge your neighbor? Who are you when you judge? None other than a God wannabe. In this way, we become like the devil himself. No surprise that the devil is mentioned in James 3:15 and James 4:7. We act exactly like the adversary who seeks to usurp God's throne and who acts as the accuser of the brethren. When you and I fight, our minds become filled with accusations. Your wrongs and my rights preoccupy me. We play the self-righteous judge in the many kingdoms we establish. Now, I want to break this statement down a little bit further and add some balance and some context to it. But before I do that, I just want to say that this statement should absolutely scare every one of us. When we judge others and condemn them in our hearts for not meeting our desires, we are imitating the devil. And when we do that, we have now doubled down on our idolatry problem. Not only have we let an idolatrous desire rule our hearts, but we have also set ourselves up as a mini god to be worshipped. Now, there are times when we can correctly judge someone biblically and should. There are times when the Bible gives us standards and conditions that people should meet and adhere to, and if they're out of that line biblically, we can righteously and correctly judge them, and we should do so. Now, remember, we always want to gently restore, and we want to be gentle at all times, right? But we can rightly judge. But when we sinfully judge someone, that's a problem. Now, I'll define sinfully judge someone as this. When we sinfully judge someone, we sinfully judge someone when we speculate motives to their actions. Only Jesus can read the heart. I'm sorry. I don't care how much you're praying, you cannot read the heart. Only Jesus can. We cannot speculate somebody's motives into their actions. If we are not careful, our desires can become expectations that become conditions and standards that we use to judge and condemn others by. When this happens, conflict becomes intensified. In other words, if I have desires that I feel are not being met, that becomes an idol in my heart, and I start to judge you because you haven't met the conditions that I feel pay homage to my desires. Now I've got a serious problem, and then when that happens, the argument becomes intensified. So after I judge you for that, then I have to punish you. Once we have made an idol out of an issue or someone has refused to give allegiance to our idol, remember an idol is anything apart from God that we depend on to be happy, fulfilled, or secure, we then demand a sacrifice from that person. You have hurt me, you have offended me, now you need to pay for that. I'm going to require a sacrifice. So this is how it usually looks, right? Now it varies in degrees, but maybe a simple way of making somebody pay for their offense to you is, I'm not going to talk to you until you apologize to me. You ever done that in your home? Now, I'm sorry, God, I'm not going to go and resolve this conflict. This is the last time Sharna's going to do this to me. Every time I apologize, and I'm tired of this, she's going to come to me and make things right this time. I'm not talking to her until she apologizes. God says I made an idol out of whatever the issue was. Or perhaps our kids are using pouting or stomping or shoot us dirty looks for not meeting their desires. Perhaps we withdraw from a relationship. Maybe we resort to physical violence. Basically, any attempt to control others, making them suffer for their action. So any behavior, any actions, any words that we use in an attempt to control others to make them suffer for their actions towards us. That is punishing. That is the fourth progression of the step of an idol. Now, you guys have heard this expression before. Women have a gift to set the tone in a home. If she is not careful, she can pervert that gift and use it to create an irritable, unpleasant atmosphere that tells her family, get in line with what I want, or you will suffer. Now, I don't know why I was preaching at Mayo and I was compelled to use this illustration when I was talking about wives. But I think it's just the country in me, and believe me, I mean nothing by this, okay? But there's a tactic if you have an unruly horse. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you have an unruly horse in your field, if you have a maverick that's always bunking and brocking and is just always out of line and he's nasty and selfish and kicking other animals and things like that, there's a tactic that some farmers have developed, some horse raisers have developed, and that is you put a goat in the pen with them. Now that seems odd, but goats have this uncanny ability of walking underneath horses and eating the food underneath them. They do that. Goats are crazy. They're fearless. They will walk underneath this horse and they will eat food. Now, I don't know what it is, if the goat is just so much smaller, the horse just has pity on them, or if horses just naturally like goats. I don't know what it is, but in most cases, that horse will calm down because that goat is in there with them, because it doesn't want to hurt the goat. And that goat is not afraid to walk around in places it can get hurt. It has a calming effect. Now, I'm sorry about this illustration, but women, you have that same ability. You have the ability to calm others around you. You have the ability to calm those in your family. I don't know if, like the husband comes home, he's the raging bull, he's the bunking bronco, and he's just in a mood, and he is raging on everybody, and the rage monster comes out and he's yelling. Wives have this ability to calm them. They also have the ability, maybe it's the sound of the nurturing voice inside them, or the tone in their voice, or maybe it's their kids recognize that they truly would lay their life down for them. I don't know this, but they have the ability to tone their kids down and to bring this calmness. That's a gift that God's given you, and if you do that, you create an atmosphere that people want to be in. But if you pervert that gift, you create an irritable, unpleasant atmosphere that tells the family, get in line or you will suffer. Now, gentlemen, we can be the same way. Now, we might not be the same as women. We have another problem that most gentlemen struggle with. Now, these are stereotypes, and you could fit anywhere, and I'm not a big fan of stereotypes because if you don't fit in a stereotype, it makes you feel weird. But the point is this, is that men have the same ability. When a man wants to change the tone of the house, when a man wants everybody to change into a way that they want them to be, they often resort to criticism. We become hypercritical of everything our wife is doing or everything our children are doing. We become critical. And we do that specifically to let them know, if you don't change, this attitude is going to persist. Now, keep in mind, as we talk about this, we are all Christians here. And you know what that means as Christians? 95% of you are passive-aggressive. That means instead of just letting somebody know that you have a problem with them, you're just going to give an attitude problem to them until they figure it out and change the way you want them to. That's what Christians do. It's not healthy. It's bad, but that's what we do. Such behavior is an act of unbelief. Instead of relying on God's means of grace to sanctify a family, the husband or wife has used their own tools to punish or manipulate the family into change. The same thing can happen at a church as well. If I am demanding my way be done, or I get unhappy, or give dirty looks, or start contention, I'm doing the same thing, right? I am leading to a conflict. I am pursuing a conflict. I have now started to punish you for not meeting my desire. Or if I exhibit any behavior that manipulates people into doing my will, I am committing the same sin. When we catch ourselves punishing others in any way, whether deliberately, overtly, or unconsciously and subtly, it is a warning that something other than God is ruling our hearts. If you are punishing somebody because your desires weren't met and you expect them to change, and if they don't, you're going to continue with this attitude, that is a sign, a sure-tale sign that God is not ruling your heart, at least in that moment. So what is the cure for an idolatrous heart? How do we get out of that cycle? We have seen so far that an idol is any desire that has grown into a consuming demand that rules our heart. Another way of saying that is an idol is something we love, fear, or trust. The Bible teaches us in Matthew 22:37, and he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. We are to love the Lord with all of our heart. In Luke 12:4-5, I tell you, my friends, do not fear those who kill the body and after that have nothing more that they can do. But I will warn you whom to fear. Fear him who after he is killed has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. We are to fear the Lord only according to the Bible. And moreover, John 14:1, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. The reason why I share those verses for you is because love, fear, and trust are words of worship. And so if we have set up something in our lives apart from God that we depend on for our happiness, our fulfillment, our security, we love, fear, and trust that item, we have made it our God. And that means that God has no place in our heart. We are worshiping a false god. If that is the case, we need to be delivered from our idolatry and be brought into harmony with God. Exodus 20, verses 2 and 3. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. The Bible is very clear. The only way to be delivered from this cycle is to put our idols away. We must acknowledge our sin, repent of it, and put our trust in Jesus. You may not want to, but once it has gotten this far, you will have to take corrective steps. If you want to regain peace in your hearts, you have to remove the obstacle that is blocking God from reigning in your heart. David tells us in Psalms 32, I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. Now, this is a very important verse, and the reason why this is a very important verse is because every single one of us sitting in this room are susceptible to putting idols in our hearts. I don't care how much you love Jesus Christ. I don't care how close you follow him. Because of your sinful nature, you are susceptible to creating idols in your hearts based on your unmet desires. And David says that when that happens, you need to acknowledge your sin, you need to not cover it up, and you need to confess your transgressions to the Lord. We must identify the sin and specifically repent and confess that sin. Then we must replace idol worship with worship of the true God. Psalm 73, 25 and 26. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desired besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. As you learn to delight more and more in God, you will find less need to You'll find less need to find happiness, fulfillment, and security in things of this world. Rather, you will find joy, peace, and contentment in God. Stan explains the root of his fight with his children that Sunday morning that we started our sermon with. The anger that Stan was feeling was anything but righteous anger. Rather, it sprang from his worshiping his idol of peace and convenience. Stan was tired of working that week. He just craved peace and convenience in the home. And when he came home and was not received by peace and convenience, when he was received with conflict and strife, instead of dealing with that issue, he decided to worship the idol of peace and comfort he had desired in his heart that wasn't being met. And as a result, he judged those around them, demanded they change their behavior, and punished them if they didn't. As he recognized this and repented of it, and made things right with his family, he tells of how his peace was restored with God and how his worship experience that day was more exhilarating than many months before. Brothers and sisters, I guess my point is very simple. If you're in conflict with somebody else, if you don't have peace towards somebody else, you need to figure out why. If it's your issue, you need to get the log out of your eye before you're going to be right with God again. There's no other way around it. That is a biblical model. And God is not going to change how he thinks or feels. King Saul. You guys all know King Saul. He was obsessed with his jealousy of David. He had made an idol out of being king and the kingdom being passed down to his children and his children's children. King Saul loved the fact that he was king. He didn't want to give it up. God had come to him and said that the kingdom is going to be taken from you. But Saul refused to let go of his desire in his heart. This idol he made consumed him, and he went to great lengths to try to make David suffer as a result. His idolatry led him to spending countless resources hunting after David. It led to the fracturing of his family. It led him to murder innocent priests and others he was anointed to protect. And finally, it gave him huge regrets and left him feeling alone and separated from God when he died. He could have enjoyed peace and restoration in his family and with God had he been of his idol. If he was willing to confess his sins and trust God, he would have enjoyed that peace. And even in his life, we see flashes of that. You guys remember the story when Saul tracks down David to that cave. And he goes inside that cave, and David is in there. And Saul doesn't know he's there, and David cuts off a corner of his robe, and then he feels so guilty about it and so terrible about it, he's willing to sacrifice his life to make things right with his king. And he goes out and he says, I am undone. How dare I touch the Lord's anointed? And when Saul sees young David there, the Holy Spirit meets King Saul. And he recognizes that this whole conflict is a result of his idolatry that he set up in his heart. That yes, David did his part. He did have some wrongs. But the conflict was Saul's jealousy. The root of the issue belonged with Saul. Saul confessed his sins and trusted in God. And for a moment you could see he was happy. For a moment you could see the kingdom was blessed. But Saul made a fatal mistake. After he got rid of the idol in his heart, he didn't replace it with worshiping God. And eventually, the idol came back into his heart. And he pursued his course all over again, hunting down David, chasing David, trying to kill David to prevent him from taking his kingdom, to prevent him from taking his idol. It behooves us that whenever we have a serious conflict with others, that we search our hearts and pray to see if we are controlled by unmet desires that have turned into idols. I don't know about you, but the nice thing about the Bible is it gives us safe stories to study. It's easy to look at somebody else's life and study it and examine it and learn lessons from it because it doesn't offend us. But a wise person will look at those stories and will take every spiritual application they can from that story and apply it to their lives. Saul's idolatry, his refusal to get the log out of his own eye, ruined his family, it ruined his kingdom, it destroyed Israel, it destroyed David's life for most of it, and it left him with serious regrets and bitterness and alone and destitute at his death. Was it worth it? Was it worth it? Let me ask you this question now. Let me make it real personal. Whatever conflict you might find yourself in, whatever conflict you're dealing with, is it worth that? Is it worth it? Father, as we seek to be right with you and we seek to be right with others, help us to see if the problem lies in ourselves. Help us to see if we have created an unmet desire that has turned into an idol in our heart, where we harbor it and we continually go back to it and make the person pay homage to it before we will settle the issue with them. Father, if that's the case, help us to have humility to make things right with you. Help us to put the idols away in our hearts and help us to worship you afterwards, Father, and help us to make right with somebody else, Father. We pray that as we resolve conflict biblically and in your way, that not only will it bring glory to you, but it'll bring us closer to that person, Father, and in return closer to you. We ask that you will bless us as you talk to us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.